It took 40 years to build my life, yet only 40 minutes to learn my only son would kill me for it. As he tightened a leather belt around my wrist to force a signature, his wife laughed and told me to sign so everything would be theirs. They thought age had made me weak. They were wrong. The night they demanded my legacy was the night they lost their future. My name is Evelyn Hart. At 62 years old, I was a widow living in the quiet, fictional town of Maple Ridge, Colorado. I had recently retired after decades of working as a care coordinator at Brightrise Home Care Solutions, a job where I spent my life looking after the fragile and the forgotten. I never imagined I would become one of them. My living room was small but warm, filled with the scent of dried lavender and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Spread across the coffee table were my house deeds and financial power of attorney documents. I had been reviewing them, enjoying the peace of a Tuesday evening, when the silence was shattered. A fist pounded against my front door, violent and demanding. "Mum, open the door." It was Luke. My voice caught in my throat. Before I could even rise from my armchair, the door flew open. Luke stumbled in, the stench of cheap whiskey rolling off him in waves. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. Trailing behind him was Tessa, his wife. She looked dishevelled in a stained tank top, a half-empty beer bottle dangling loosely from her fingers. She scanned my sanctuary with a sneer. "It is almost all ours." "Right. Honey?" she asked, followed by a sharp, cruel laugh. Luke ignored her and marched toward the table. He slapped a thick stack of papers down, covering the documents I had been reading. "Bank forms," he slurred, shoving a cheap plastic pen into my hand. "Just need you to sign for that loan assistance. Just a formality." I adjusted my reading glasses and looked down. The legal jargon was dense, but 40 years of administrative work had taught me how to read the fine print. These were not loan applications. They were quitclaim deeds and total asset transfer agreements. "Luke," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "This takes my name off the house title. This empties my retirement fund. I cannot sign this." Luke stared at me. The mask of the desperate son vanished, replaced by a cold, feral rage. He reached for his waist. With a swift, practiced motion, he unbuckled his heavy leather belt and whipped it off. He slammed the metal buckle onto the oak table with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. Tessa giggled from the doorway. "The man of the house has to teach Mom a lesson." Luke wrapped the thick leather strap around his hand, leaving a loop free. He lunged forward and cinched the belt around my thin wrist. He jerked me forward, dragging my chest against the hard edge of the table. The leather bit into my skin, cutting off the circulation. "Sign it." "Mom," he growled, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and sour. "Sign it, and everything will be ours." Behind him, Tessa held up her phone. She was recording. She was laughing as if this were a private joke. Terror washed over me, cold and paralyzing. I felt small. I felt pathetic. But then, my gaze fell to my left arm. Hidden beneath the thick wool of my cardigan sleeve was a small medical alert bracelet I had started wearing after a severe dizzy spell last month. Luke was too focused on his power trip to notice my right hand sliding under the table. I found the button. I pressed it. The tiny light blinked red, unseen by my tormentors. 3 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the night air. Luke froze. His grip on the belt slackened. "What did you do?" he hissed. My neighbour, Mr. Miller, must have received the automated notification and called 911. Panic replaced the arrogance in Luke's eyes. He frantically unwrapped the belt from my wrist, snatched the papers from the table, and shoved them deep into his jacket pocket. Tessa reacted instantly. She moved close to me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You fell, Evelyn. You are old and confused. You tripped on the rug and hurt your wrist. Stick to the script." Heavy fists pounded on the door. "Police, open up." Luke stepped back, smoothing his shirt, transforming instantly into a concerned citizen. I clutched my throbbing wrist, watching the red welt rise on my pale skin. The police entered, followed by paramedics. I looked at the officer, then back at my son. I opened my mouth to scream the truth. Tessa leaned into my ear, her voice like ice. "You say a word, and we throw you in a mental asylum. Nobody believes a senile old woman over her caring children." I swallowed my words. The threat was not empty. I knew how the system worked. They loaded me onto a stretcher. "We need to take you in to check that wrist, ma'am, just to be sure," the paramedic said kindly. As they wheeled me out to the ambulance, I stared up at the metal ceiling of the vehicle. 2 streams of tears rolled down my cheeks. I was not crying because of the bruising on my wrist. I was crying because I understood the reality of my situation. Tonight, it was a belt. If I did not act, next time it would be a weapon that left no survivors. "Does this hurt?" the nurse asked, her gloved fingers gently prodding the purple welt encircling my wrist. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room were harsh, exposing every wrinkle on my hands, every sign of the time I had spent on this earth. I looked away, staring at the sterile white curtain. I tripped on the stairs. I lied. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. I tried to catch myself on the railing. The nurse did not look convinced, but she nodded and turned to write on her clipboard. As the pen scratched against the paper, the sound dragged me back 40 years, to a different time and a different pain. I was back in Ironview, a gritty industrial city where the air always tasted of sulfur and coal dust. I was 20 years old, pregnant, and sitting alone in a dilapidated apartment that smelled of damp wood. I used to dream of being a painter. I had a scholarship to an art school in New York, a portfolio full of landscapes, and a heart full of colour. Then my husband, a coal miner with a smile that could light up the underground, died in a shaft collapse. The settlement money was barely enough to cover the funeral. I put down my brushes and picked up a waitress apron. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep a roof over Luke's head. My memories shifted to Luke as a child. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table late at night, my fingers bleeding as I sewed the soles of his sneakers back together because I could not afford a new pair. I remembered skipping dinner, telling him I had eaten at work so he could have the extra portion of meatloaf. "Mum does not need anything," I would tell him as I tucked him in. "I just need you to have a future." But as Luke grew, the gratitude I hoped for turned into entitlement. By his teenage years, the sweet boy who used to draw me pictures had become a stranger who stole $20 bills from my purse. I spent nights at the police station, weeping, begging the officers to let him go. "It is my fault," I would sob to the sergeant. "I have been working too much. I did not teach him well enough." The turning point should have been the night he crashed my old sedan into a streetlight while driving drunk. He was 19. He faced jail time, I had one thing of value left: my diamond wedding ring. The last piece of my husband I still held on to. I sold it the next morning to hire the best defense attorney in the county. I remember that lawyer looking at me as he took the check. He did not smile. "Mrs. Hart, you are saving him from a cell today," he had warned me. "But if you do not let him feel the consequences, you will pay a much higher price later." I should have listened. Then came Tessa. They met at a dive bar, and within 3 months, they were married. I tried to be happy for him. I really did. When they said they needed money for a down payment on a starter home, I withdrew a massive chunk of my retirement savings. I found out months later they used it to pay off Tessa's credit card debt from a failed vacation to Las Vegas. That was when the poison started to drip into our lives. Tessa began planting seeds. "Mom is getting old," she would say at Sunday dinner. "She should rest. She should stay home and let us handle the complicated financial stuff." Gradually, Luke stopped seeing my house as my home and started seeing it as his inheritance. The visits became infrequent. The phone only rang when they needed something. "Mom, can you lend us 1,000 for the car repair?" Luke would ask, never asking how I was. "We will take care of you later. It is all the same pot anyway." The memory that hurt the most was from 3 months ago, my 62nd birthday. I had sat in my living room with a small vanilla cake I had bought from the bakery discount rack. I had set 3 plates. I waited until the candles burned down to the frosting. The door never opened. My phone buzzed once. It was a text from Luke. "Mum, can you transfer rent money for this month? Work is slow. No happy birthday. Just a demand." Back in the hospital room, the doctor walked in, pulling me from the wreckage of my past. He looked at my chart and then at my bruised wrist. "Mrs. Hart," he said gently, "we are going to discharge you, but we cannot in good conscience send you home alone if you are prone to falls. Is there a family member we can call to come pick you up?" I closed my eyes. I saw the belt. I saw the cold calculation in Tessa's eyes. I saw the boy I had sacrificed my dreams for turning into a monster. I opened my eyes and sat up straighter than I had in years. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Do not call my family. I need a lawyer more." A social worker named Mariah entered my hospital room not long after the doctor left. She had kind eyes, but a clipboard that she held like a shield. She asked the standard questions about my health, my diet, and my medical history. Then, the room went quiet. She set the clipboard down, looked me squarely in the eye, and asked the question that would shatter the last of my denial. "Mrs. Hart, do you feel safe in your own home?" I opened my mouth to say yes. It was the automatic response, the one I had given to neighbors and friends for years to cover up Luke's temper. But the phantom sensation of the leather belt tightening around my wrist stopped me. The air in the room felt heavy. "No," I whispered. "No, I do not." Mariah nodded slowly. She began to explain terms I had heard on the news, but never applied to myself. Financial exploitation, elder abuse, coercion. She told me that forcing someone to sign documents under threat of violence was not a family dispute. It was a felony. "But he is my son," I stammered. "He just gets angry." "Anger is shouting, 'Mrs. Hart,'" Mariah said firmly. "Using a weapon to transfer property is a crime. If you go back there tonight, the next time might not end with just a bruise." An hour later, Mariah had arranged a meeting with a legal aid organization specializing in elder protection. I was introduced to Jared Cole. He was a man in his early 40s with greying hair and a suit that looked like it had seen better days. But his handshake was solid. He sat across from me in a small, windowless office and listened. I told him everything. I told him about the belt. I told him about the loan papers that were actually deeds. I told him about the thousands of dollars I had given Luke over the years for emergencies that never seemed to end. Jared took notes in silence. When I finished, he leaned forward. Evelyn, you need to understand how close you came to disaster. If you had signed those papers, they would have owned your home and your savings by this morning. They could have evicted you tomorrow. You would have lost your autonomy completely. My motherly instinct flared up, a reflex I could not control. Luke would not go that far, I said, my voice shaking. He is just under a lot of financial pressure. He has debts. Jared stopped writing. He took off his glasses and looked at me with an intensity that made me flinch. Evelyn, he said softly but with steel in his tone. Financial pressure does not give anyone the right to put a belt around their mother's wrist. That is not stress. That is predation. The word hung in the air. Predation. Jared advised me immediately against returning to Maple Ridge. He proposed a county program for elder protection that could place me in a temporary safe house. It was a short-term apartment in a secure complex with an undisclosed address. I cannot afford that, I said, feeling the familiar weight of poverty settling on my shoulders. I live on a fixed income. My savings are, well, depleted. Jared typed something into his computer. He turned the screen toward me. Actually, Evelyn, you have more than you think. He pulled up a record from my time at Brightrise Home Care Solutions, decades ago. I had enrolled in an employee stock purchase plan. It was a small deduction from my paycheck. 5% here, 3% there. I had ignored it, assuming it was negligible. But Brightrise had been acquired by a larger conglomerate 5 years ago, and the stock had split and grown. You have nearly $180,000 in this account, Jared said. It was never touched because it was separate from your main bank account. I stared at the screen. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the monitor. I was not destitute. I had a cushion. I had options. But then a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I remembered the last time Luke visited. He had been digging through my old filing cabinet, claiming he was looking for his birth certificate. Mariah, who had stayed in the room, noticed my expression. He knew, she said, her voice quiet but sharp as a razor. Perhaps your son found a statement. It is not a coincidence that he demanded you sign everything over to him right now. He was not just trying to take your house, Evelyn. He was trying to take this before you realized you had it. That night, I lay in a narrow bed in a studio apartment on the other side of the city. The sheets were stiff, and the room smelled of lemon cleaner. It was not my home. My home was filled with memories of a little boy who used to pick dandelions for me, but that home was now a crime scene. I stared up at the unfamiliar ceiling, tracing the patterns in the plaster. The tears did not come this time. Instead, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the center of my chest. You chose the belt. Luke, I whispered into the darkness. So, I will choose the law. Jared did not work alone. 2 days later, he introduced me to Noah. a private investigator with sharp features and the kind of quiet demeanor that made people forget he was in the room. Hiring a stranger to dig into the life of my own child felt like a betrayal of every maternal instinct I possessed. I sat in Jared's office, wringing my hands, feeling the nausea of guilt rise in my throat. "I feel like a traitor," I whispered to Jared. "He is my son. He is a man who tried to strangle you with a belt," Jared replied, his voice devoid of judgment but heavy with truth. "If they are willing to strip you bare, Evelyn, you need to know who they really are." So I agreed, and what Noah found stripped away the last remnants of my denial. Noah placed a tablet on the desk. "Luke is not just under financial pressure. Mrs. Hart. He is drowning." The screen showed a spiderweb of transactions. Luke was $55,000 in debt, not from student loans or a mortgage, but from online gambling and high-risk cryptocurrency trading. He had been funneling money into offshore exchange platforms that looked more like scams than investments. He was chasing a fortune that did not exist, using money he did not have. "And Tessa?" I asked, dreading the answer. "She is smarter," Noah said, "but more dangerous." He pulled up a document from the Secretary of State. It was a registration for a company called Hart Family Wellness, LLC. I had never heard of it. Noah explained that the sole purpose of this shell company was to secure a business loan. The collateral listed on the application was my house. "But the bank has not approved it yet," Noah noted, "because your name is still on the deed." Then came the first twist that made me gasp. Noah slid a grainy photograph across the polished wood of the desk. It showed Tessa at a dimly lit steakhouse, laughing and touching the hand of a man who was definitely not my son. "Who is that?" I asked. "That is the senior loan officer at Phoenix Crest Bank," Noah said. "The same bank where they applied for the loan. Tessa is not just using you, Mrs. Hart. She is playing Luke, too. She is securing that loan by any means necessary." My stomach turned. Luke was a monster to me, but he was a pawn to her. Noah was not finished. He played a video clip recovered from a security camera across the street from my house. I watched the timestamp. It was from 3 weeks ago. In the video, Luke's truck swerved into my driveway. He stumbled out, clearly intoxicated, and hurled a beer bottle at my front porch. It shattered against the siding. I remembered hearing that noise and thinking it was the wind knocking over a planter. "Tessa tells their friends that you are the difficult one," Noah said softly. "She tells people you are senile and aggressive. But this footage proves a pattern of intimidation that has been going on for months." I watched my son on the screen, his face twisted in a hate I did not recognize. The narrative I had clung to for years, that Luke was just stressed and overworked, disintegrated. This was not stress. This was a systematic campaign of terror designed to break me down until I signed. "Here is their endgame," Jared explained, drawing a line on a notepad. "They force you to sign the deed over to the LLC. They get the loan, maybe $200,000. They take the cash. When the business inevitably fails because it is fake, the bank forecloses on the house. You end up homeless. They declare bankruptcy, blaming the market, and walk away with the cash hidden in accounts we cannot touch." I felt cold. It was so calculated. "There is one last thing," Noah said. He opened a file from another state. "Tessa's maiden name is different in the system. 7 years ago, she was sued in Arizona. She befriended an elderly nail salon owner. convinced the woman to invest her life savings in a startup, and vanished. They settled out of court, so it never hit the papers, but the records are there. She was a predator. She had done this before. I looked at the pile of evidence, the gambling debts, the affair, the violence, the fraud. For the first time in 40 years, I did not see the toddler with the scraped knee. I did not see the teenager I had bailed out of jail. I saw a grown man who had made his choices. He is not the boy I can save anymore, I said, my voice steadying as the grief turned into armor. He is my opponent. Jared leaned back in his chair. So, the question is simple. Evelyn, what do you want to do? Do you want to just block their plan and retreat? Or do you want to let them taste the very trap they set for you? I looked at my hands. They were wrinkled and spotted with age, but they were still strong. I placed my palm flat on the file containing the proof of their betrayal. Both, I said. I want to do both. Following Jared's advice, I vanished. For 3 days, I let my phone ring into the void. The silence from my end created a vacuum that Luke and Tessa rushed to fill with their own desperation. My notifications screen became a scrolling timeline of their panic. Their messages swung violently between saccharine concern, "Mum, please pick up. We are so worried about your heart," and thinly veiled threats. "If you do not answer by noon, we are calling the police to break your door down." Every text, voicemail, and missed call was archived by Jared's software. On the 4th day, I sat in a chair in the safe house. I had deliberately messed up my hair and skipped wearing makeup to appear more haggard, more defeated. Jared sat behind the laptop camera, giving me a silent nod to begin. I initiated a video call. Luke picked up on the first ring. His face filled the screen, flushed and anxious. "Mom, where the hell have you been?" he shouted, though he quickly checked himself, lowering his voice to a forced calm. "We have been driving past the house. The lights are off." "I am at a care center." I lied, letting my voice tremble just enough to be convincing. "My head, it has been spinning. So many papers. It is all just too confusing for me." The tension in Luke's shoulders visibly dropped. He exchanged a look with someone off-screen, Tessa, and then turned back to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "That is exactly why we want to help. Mom," he said, his tone dripping with false honey. "You shouldn't be worrying about paperwork in your condition. When you get discharged, we will bring the documents over. We can settle this once and for all." Tessa's face popped into the frame, crowding Luke. She tried to look sympathetic, but her eyes were calculating, scanning the background of my video feed. "Mum, listen," she said, speaking fast. "I found this incredible private doctor who specializes in geriatric care. He is the best, but he costs about $4,000 a month. We want to hire him for you. If you sign the asset transfer, we can use the equity to pay for him. We just want you to be healthy." I felt a flash of cold anger. There was no doctor. They wanted the equity to pay off the gambling debts and the loan shark interest rates Noah had uncovered. I glanced at Jared, who pointed to the microphone to remind me it was recording. I took a shaky breath and played my part. But I paused, looking down at my hands. "If I sign the house, it is still mine. Right, I can still live there." Luke let out a short, impatient breath, but he masked it with a chuckle. "Mum, we have been over this. Once you sign, legally it belongs to us. But We will let you stay there as long as you want. Do not overthink it. It is just a technicality for the bank. Jared cut the connection a moment later after I agreed to meet them. He leaned back, a grim satisfaction on his face. That was it, he said. That was the golden evidence. He admitted on record that the transfer is to deceive the bank and that he is misleading you about the legal ownership. Legally ours implies intent to dispossess. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and nausea. I was learning to use their own greed as a weapon. Set the meeting, I told Jared. Tell them I will be home on Saturday. Tell them I am ready to sign. I sent the message. I added a condition I wanted a witness present, an old friend of mine named Noah, to make sure I filled out the lines correctly. Luke agreed immediately, thinking Noah was just some senile retiree from the neighborhood. He had no idea Noah was a private investigator who would be wired with hidden cameras and microphones. Noah intercepted their text exchange 5 minutes later. She is finally cracking. Luke had texted Tessa. We have to get her to sign on Saturday. If we miss the deadline, the bank voids the application. Tessa's reply was chilling. Just make sure she signs. If she plays the dementia card again, we dump her in that state-funded nursing home on the east side. The cheap one. For the next 2 days, I practiced with Jared. We rehearsed every possible insult they might throw at me. He taught me how to breathe through the rage, how to prolong the conversation to get them to incriminate themselves further. I realized that after a lifetime of silence, my voice was not just returning, it was sharpening. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in the temporary apartment. The city lights of Denver flickered outside, indifferent to my war. I rubbed the fading yellow bruise on my wrist. Tomorrow, I whispered to the empty room. My son will reach for a belt again. Only this time. He will be tightening it around his own future. It felt strange walking back into my own living room. The air was stale, preserving the memory of that Tuesday night like a museum exhibit. But today, the space had been transformed. Noah and a technician had spent the morning turning my sanctuary into a surveillance box. A pinhole camera was hidden in the number 12 of the wall clock. Another was concealed inside a fake outlet cover near the baseboards. A microphone, no larger than a button, was taped securely under the lip of the oak coffee table. Outside, parked discreetly down the street, was Sheriff Miller, a childhood friend of my neighbor, waiting for the signal? At 2 o'clock sharp, the front door opened. Luke walked in, followed closely by Tessa. They carried a fresh folder of documents and a heavy black pen. "Mom, you look better," Luke said, his smile tight and practiced. I sat in my armchair, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. I watched their eyes dart around the room, checking the corners, checking the hallway. They were looking for witnesses. They found none. "Did you bring the papers for the bank?" I asked, deliberately letting my voice waver. I forgot what they were for again. Tessa rolled her eyes, dropping the act immediately. She tossed her purse onto the sofa with a thud. "Mum, we already explained this," she snapped. "You do not work anymore. Why do you need your name on the deed? It is just extra taxes." Luke sat opposite me. He stared at my hands, then at my wrist. Slowly, deliberately. He reached for his waist. The sound of leather sliding through metal loops filled the quiet room. He pulled his belt off, folded it once, and placed it gently on the table between us. It was a silent, heavy promise. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Last time, you scared us half to death with that little stunt. Do not push that button today. No one is coming to save you." Tessa stood behind him, resting her hands on the back of his chair. She let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Sign it, Mum? Then everything will be ours. Do you not want our family to be happy?" The microphone under the table caught every syllable. I picked up the pen. My hand shook, partly from the act, partly from genuine adrenaline. I touched the tip to the paper. "Here?" I asked. "Yes, right there," Luke urged, tapping the line. I moved the pen down and scribbled a nonsensical line across the bottom of the page, ruining the document. Oh dear. I think I signed the wrong spot. Luke exploded. He slammed his fist onto the table so hard the belt skittered off and hit the floor. The mask of the patient's son vanished entirely. He reached out and grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my flesh. He shook me, his face contorted with rage. "You useless old..." He spat, his spittle hitting my cheek. "You are just a burden, a withered old corpse dragging us down. Sign the damn paper properly." I looked straight into his eyes. I did not blink. I did not cry. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as my child, but as a stranger. "If I do not sign today," I asked, my voice calm and clear, "what happens?" Luke's answer came from instinct, primal and violent. "Then we will make you sign." Knock, knock, knock. The heavy pounding on the front door froze the room. Luke released me as if I were burning hot. He scrambled to pick up the belt, shoving it behind a cushion. Tessa snatched the papers, folding them frantically against her chest. "Come in," I called out, my voice steady. "The door is unlocked." The door swung open. Sheriff Miller stepped in, his hand resting near his holster, followed by 2 deputies. The sudden influx of uniforms made the small room feel suffocated. "Afternoon, folks," the sheriff said, his eyes hard as flint. "We are investigating a report of elder abuse and attempted extortion." Luke forced a laugh, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. It is just a family matter. We were just helping my mother with her finances." "It is not a family matter anymore," a voice said from the kitchen doorway. Noah stepped out, holding a tablet. "We have a search warrant for this property and your vehicle, and we have everything you just said recorded on this drive." Luke looked from the sheriff to Noah, and then to me. His face turned a mottled red. The realization that he had walked into a trap shattered his composure. "Sit down," a deputy ordered. "I have the right," Luke screamed, lunging forward before being restrained. "I have the right to take what belongs to me. This house. Sooner or later it is mine anyway. She is just wasting it." Tessa, realizing the ship was sinking, turned on me with venomous eyes. "You calculated which? You think you can stop us? The bank already pre-approved the loan on the equity. We just needed your signature to cash out." Every word was another nail in their coffin. I watched them scream, watched them unravel, and felt nothing but a cold, quiet peace. The fallout from the arrest was swift and clinical. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in a wind tunnel. The moment the police report was filed, the machinery of the financial world turned against my son and his wife with a ruthlessness that almost made me pity them. Almost. Phoenix Crest Bank froze the loan application for Hart Family Wellness LLC within an hour of receiving the subpoena. The senior loan officer, the man Noah had photographed holding hands with Tessa, was suspended pending an internal audit. Facing the ruin of his own career, he wasted no time in cooperating with the investigators. He handed over every email and text message Tessa had sent him, desperate to prove he was a victim of her manipulation rather than a co-conspirator in fraud. I sat in a conference room with Jared and a forensic accountant, sifting through the wreckage of my finances. It was worse than we thought. "He signed your name here," the accountant said, sliding a credit card statement across the glass table. "And here." Luke had opened 3 secondary credit cards in my name, racking up nearly $12,000 in charges for online gambling credits and liquor. He had forged my signature with a shaky hand that looked nothing like mine, but no one had checked until now. "We are filing an emergency motion," Jared told me, his voice devoid of emotion. "The civil court is issuing a protective order. All transactions involving your property are frozen. We are also seizing the truck Luke drives. Since he listed it as a company asset for their shell corporation, it is now subject to the investigation." Then came the discovery that made my blood run cold. The accountant found a document where Luke had used my home as a guarantor for a personal loan taken out by one of his drinking buddies. If that friend had defaulted and he was already 2 payments behind, the creditors would have come for my house. "He bet my roof on a stranger's debt," I whispered, feeling the room spin. "We are voiding it," Jared assured me. "We have proof the signature is a forgery. You will not pay a dime." As the pressure mounted, the alliance between Luke and Tessa fractured. Tessa, realizing the ship was going down, hired her own lawyer. She filed a motion to separate her legal liability from Luke's, claiming she had been coerced by an abusive husband into participating. To buy leniency, she offered the prosecutor a trove of digital evidence. Her betrayal revealed the true architect of my misery. It was not Luke. It was Tessa. "Look at this email from 2 years ago," Jared said, reading from the file Tessa had surrendered. She outlines the plan explicitly. She calls it the tax shelter strategy. She was the one who came up with the idea to frame the theft as estate planning to avoid inheritance taxes. Luke was the muscle, Evelyn, but Tessa was the mind. We did not just stop at defense. Jared helped me file a massive civil lawsuit against both of them for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and emotional distress. We sought damages totaling nearly $300,000. "They will never be able to pay this," I said, looking at the number. "That is the point," Jared replied. "This judgment will follow them for decades. Any assets they acquire, any tax refunds, any future wages, we will garnish it all. They wanted to leave you with nothing. Now, they will owe you everything." The social consequences hit Luke harder than the legal ones. The local newspaper ran the story with the headline, "Local Man Arrested for Assaulting Mother Over Inheritance Dispute." By noon the next day, the construction company where Luke worked as a site foreman fired him. In a small town like Maple Ridge, reputation is currency, and Luke was now bankrupt. 3 days later, I walked into the main branch of my own bank. In the past, I had come here to plead with tellers to waive overdraft fees Luke had caused. I had walked with my head down, ashamed of my son's mistakes. Today, I walked in with my head high. The branch manager rushed over, ushering me into his private office. "Mrs. Hart, we are terribly sorry for the distress," he said, his hands clasping and unclasping nervously. "We have implemented a total freeze on Luke's access. He cannot touch a cent. Your accounts are secure?" I signed the final paperwork to revoke his power of attorney forever. The pen scratched against the paper, a sound of finality. "Thank you," I said. "Please ensure that if he steps foot in this branch, security is called immediately." "Of course, Mrs. Hart." I walked out of the bank and stopped on the sidewalk. I caught my reflection in the tinted glass of the window. I saw a woman with silver hair and a sensible coat. But for the first time in 40 years, I did not see Luke's mother or the widow. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the hose. "Hello, Evelyn?" I said softly to my reflection. "It is nice to meet you again." The district attorney did not hold back. The charges against my son were read aloud in a monotone voice that made them sound even more terrifying: felony elder abuse, attempted extortion, forgery, and coercion. Luke sat at the defense table, his shoulders hunched, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Tessa sat at a separate table, flanked by her own legal team. She was facing lighter charges of fraud and conspiracy because she had agreed to testify against her husband. But the fear in her eyes was real. In the initial hearing, Luke tried one last desperate gamble. He walked with a slight limp that I knew was fake, and when the judge asked about bail, he put on his most pathetic voice. "Your Honor, I am requesting bail because, well, my mother is old. She needs me. I am the only one who can take care of her." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. For a second, I saw pity on the faces of the spectators. Then the prosecutor stood up and pressed a button. The large screens on the wall flickered to life. The audio from the hidden microphone filled the room, crisp and clear. "Sign it, Mom. Sign it, and everything will be ours." Then the video played. The sight of Luke slamming the belt onto the table and lunging at me caused a collective gasp. The judge watched it, his face turning into a mask of stone. He looked down at Luke. "Bail is denied," the judge said, slamming his gavel. "You are a danger to the victim, Mr. Hart." Luke's lawyer tried a different tactic. He painted a picture of a desperate son pushed to the brink by a mother who was squandering the family inheritance. "My client was under immense stress," the lawyer argued. "Mrs. Hart was spending recklessly, endangering the family estate." Jared was ready. He presented a comparative financial analysis. On the left screen was my spending generic groceries, utility bills, and a $20 donation to the church. On the right screen was Luke spending thousands of dollars on sports betting apps, liquor stores, and electronics. The narrative of the senile spendthrift crumbled instantly. Then came Tessa. She took the stand, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "I was scared," she sobbed into the microphone. "Luke, he has a temper. He forced me to go along with it. I never wanted to hurt Evelyn." The prosecutor waited for her to finish before holding up a piece of paper. "Mrs. Hart," the prosecutor said sharply, "if you were forced, can you explain this email you sent to your loan officer lover 3 months ago?" He read the text aloud. "Once the old hag signs the house over, we can liquidate the assets, take the cash, and move to Arizona. She will be dead soon anyway." Tessa's face went pale. Her tears stopped instantly. The jury looked at her with undisguised disgust. Just when I thought it was over, the courtroom doors opened. Mr. Miller, my quiet neighbor who usually kept to himself, walked to the stand. He had brought more than just his testimony. He had footage from his porch camera going back 6 months. The court watched clip after clip of Luke arriving at my house drunk, throwing bottles at my door, screaming obscenities into the night because I had refused to give him money. "I heard it through the fence," Mr. Miller said, his voice gruff but steady. He told her she was useless. He told her she should just die so he could get his money. Luke's lawyer saw the case collapsing. He turned to look directly at me, trying to exploit the bond of motherhood one last time. "Mrs. Hart," he said softly, "this is your son. Surely we can resolve this without prison if you just offer forgiveness. The court might be lenient. Do you really want to destroy his life?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was straight. "For 30 years, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. I chose forgiveness instead of letting my son take responsibility. I paid his debts. I hid his crimes. I thought that was love. But the result is that we are here today. This time, I choose justice." Luke snapped. The facade broke completely. He jumped up from his chair, ignoring his lawyer's restraining hand. "You are nothing without me," he screamed, his face turning that familiar, violent shade of red. "I am your son. If I go to prison, who is going to take care of you? You will die alone." "Order!" the judge shouted. "You need me," Luke bellowed as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. The judge pointed a finger at him. "One more word, Mr. Hart, and I will hold you in contempt. Your outburst just proved the prosecution's point about your motive." The prosecutor closed the case by showing 2 images side by side. On the left was Luke in the video, snarling, "We will make you sign." On the right was the photo taken in the hospital, showing the purple bruise on my wrist. "He did not want a mother," the prosecutor told the jury. "He wanted a bank account that breathed." I saw the jurors nodding. Some of them looked at me with tears in their eyes. The trial was adjourned to await the verdict and sentencing. As I walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashed. The local news was already calling me the face of the fight against elder financial abuse. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor. Meanwhile, Luke was led back to a holding cell. He was not wearing his expensive suit anymore. He was wearing a baggy orange jumpsuit. There was no belt around his waist to threaten anyone with. He sat on the metal cot, looking at the concrete wall, finally alone with the consequences I had spent a lifetime protecting him from. The night before the sentencing, the silence in the safe house felt heavy enough to crush bones. I sat at the small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. In front of me lay 2 white envelopes. One contained the victim impact statement I had drafted with Jared, the words sharp and final. The other contained my new will, an unsigned document that felt heavier than lead. The existing will, currently locked in a safe deposit box, still named Luke as my sole beneficiary, even after the belt, even after the trial. My hand hovered over the pen, trembling. The ancient, illogical guilt of a mother clawed at my throat. If I cut him out completely, if he comes out of prison with nothing, how will he survive? I whispered to the empty room. My mind betrayed me. It did not show me the man who had screamed at me in court. It showed me the 7-year-old boy running through a thunderstorm to buy me cough syrup because I was too sick to move. It showed me the teenager who held me for an hour after his father's funeral, his tears soaking my shoulder. Those memories warred with the sensation of leather binding my wrist and the echo of Tessa's cruel laughter. I needed a voice other than my own. I dialed the number of Nora, an old friend and the pastor at my church. She answered on the second ring. "Evelyn," she said warmly, "are you ready for tomorrow?" "I do not know, Nora," I confessed, leaning my forehead against the cool laminate of the table. "I am trying to sign this will. I am trying to write him out of my life. But it feels like I am abandoning him." There was a long pause on the line. Then Nora spoke, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Evelyn, forgiveness is between you and God. But forgiveness does not mean you continue to hand them the knife they used to cut you. You are not abandoning him. You are stopping him from destroying the rest of what you built." Her words severed the last thread of hesitation. I hung up the phone and looked at the papers again. I picked up the pen, but I did not just sign. I made an amendment. I decided I would not leave Luke penniless in the way he feared, but I would not give him a cent he could spend on gambling or liquor. I created a clause. A small portion of my estate would go to establish the Patrick Hart Memorial Scholarship, named after my late husband. It would provide trade school tuition for young men from troubled backgrounds, boys who were just like Luke used to be. Luke would know it existed. He would see his father's name on it, but he would never have the authority to touch a single dime. The rest of my assets, including my home, my savings, and the stock portfolio, were directed into a blind trust managed by an independent firm. The funds were strictly designated for my own medical care and living expenses, with the remainder pledged to a community legal fund for elderly abuse victims. There was a specific, bolded line: "No funds shall be disbursed to Luke Hart under any circumstances." Jared arrived an hour later to notarize the signature. I pressed the pen down, the ink flowing into the paper, sealing the lock. I handed him the document. He looked at the scholarship clause and then at me. "You took away the very thing he was willing to kill you for," Jared said quietly. "But you turned it into something that might actually help someone else live." Before I turned off the lights, I picked up my phone. I scrolled back to the text message Luke had sent months ago, the one that used to make me smile with false hope. "Everything will be mine eventually. Mom." I pressed delete. Then I deleted the entire thread. I was not doing it to forget him. I was doing it so those words no longer had permission to haunt me. That night, I slept fitfully. I dreamed I was back in my old living room. The leather belt lay coiled on the floor like a dead snake. There was no one there to pick it up. In the dream, I walked over, picked it up, and placed it inside a glass cabinet. I locked the door and swallowed the key. It was a burial. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. I dressed in a simple grey suit, brushing my silver hair back from my face. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was tired. Yes, but her eyes were clear. "Today," I said to my reflection, straightening my collar, "I am not going to watch my son be punished. I am going to reclaim my own name." The courtroom was suffocatingly full. Reporters lined the back wall, and half the town of Maple Ridge seemed to have squeezed into the public gallery. Even a few former colleagues from Brightrise were there, whispering behind their hands. When the bailiff led Luke in, a hush fell over the room. He was handcuffed, wearing a suit that now hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were hollow, sunk deep into his skull, but he held his chin up in a fragile imitation of the arrogance he used to wear so easily. The judge looked over his glasses at me. "Mrs. Hart, You have the right to make a final statement before sentencing. I stood up. My knees did not shake. I walked to the podium, looked at the jury, looked at the reporters, and finally, I looked directly at my son. My name is Evelyn Hart, I said, my voice clear and unyielding. I am not an asset. I am not a property. I am a person. I took a breath, letting the weight of the last few months settle in the room. For 40 years, I gave everything. I skipped meals so he could eat. I sold my wedding ring to keep him out of jail. I thought that was love. But on a Tuesday night, my only son wrapped a leather belt around my wrist and told me that everything would be his while his eyes were fixed only on a stack of paper. I do not want him to die. I just want him to learn, finally, that a human being is not a breathing savings account. Luke made a sound like a wounded animal. Tears spilled over his cheeks, and for the first time in his life, the mask completely cracked. I am sorry, he sobbed, his voice raw. Mom, I am so sorry. There was no but. There was no demand for money attached to it. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see if the mother in me would finally break, if I would run to him and beg the judge for mercy. I turned my body fully toward him. I looked at the tears running down the face I had kissed 1,000 times as a child. I have heard that enough times, I said, my voice cold and sharp as a blade. This time, tell it to the wall of your cell, not to my wallet. It was a cruel thing to say, perhaps, but it was also the moment I finally cut the cord. The judge nodded, his face grim. He read the sentence. Luke was sentenced to 8 years in state prison for felony elder abuse and financial fraud, accompanied by a lifetime restraining order. He could never come within 500 yards of me again. Tessa, having turned state's witness, received a suspended sentence and probation, but the judge ordered her to pay full restitution and banned her from holding any fiduciary position for 10 years. As the bailiffs moved to take Luke away, panic seized him. He twisted in their grip, turning his desperate face toward me. Mom, he screamed, his voice cracking. Mom, at least promise me I will have a house when I get out. Where will I go? I did not answer. I simply placed my hand on my handbag, where the new will sat securely inside. It was a silent, absolute answer. You burned that house down yourself. Outside the courthouse, the air tasted sweeter than it ever had in Colorado. A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Mrs. Hart, do you regret sending your own son to prison? I stopped and looked into the camera lens. I only brought the truth to light, I said. He chose the path that led to that cell. I walked away from the cameras, moving through the parking lot alone. My shoulders, usually hunched with the weight of worry, were straight. I expected to feel empty, to feel the crushing void of losing my family. Instead, I felt a strange, buoyant lightness in my chest. The invisible noose that had been tightening around my neck for decades had finally been severed. Back at my apartment, the quiet was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. I kicked off my court shoes and opened the closet. I took out my own old leather belt, the only one left in the house. I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of a drawer, locking it away. It was a funeral for the fear. No one would ever use a belt, or a word, or a guilt trip to decide my life again. I went to the kitchen and filled the kettle. As the water began to boil for my evening tea, I realized it was the first cup of tea I would drink in a life that finally belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Yes, hit that like button and smash the hype button so more people can hear our stories. See you in the next video.